Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ghostly Stories, brought to you by Half Past Dead Paranormal Radio on YouTube Live. Hello, Angela. If you're here, if you're not here, when you get here, hello anyway. Um, have a few stories that I'm going to tell all you lovely people tonight, and I have a surprise guest host coming, but they are going to be a little bit late because they had to run to the store before it closed. But they will be here. So without further adieu, parting is such sweet sorrow. Axe Murder Hollow is our first story up for bids tonight. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. "We better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped back inside beside her, soaking wet. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud," he said. "I'm going to have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow, although Ned hadn't said the name out loud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Suddenly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road, supposedly, not suddenly. I can't read tonight, you guys. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Bump, bump, bump. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. "Playing around when my back was turned," the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie incandescent light. That'll teach you to play around on a ghost. Okay. The next story up for bids on tonight's eerie auction is Black Aggie. When Felix Agnes put up the life-size shrouded bronze statue of a grieving angel seated on a pedestal in the Agnes family plot in the Druid Ridge Cemetery, he had no idea what he had started. The statue was a rather eerie figure by day, frozen in a moment of grief and terrible pain. At night, the figure was almost unbelievably creepy. The shroud over its head obscuring the face until you were close to it. There was a living air about the grieving angel, as if its arms could really reach out and grab you if you weren't careful. It didn't take long for rumors to sweep through the town and surrounding countryside. They said that the statue, nicknamed Black Aggie, was haunted by the spirit of a mistreated wife who lay beneath her feet. The statue's eyes would glow red at the stroke of midnight, and any living person who returned the statue's gaze would instantly be struck blind. Any pregnant woman who passed through her shadow would miscarry. If you sat on her lap at night, the statue would come to life and crush you to death in her dark embrace. If you spoke Black Aggie's name 3 times at midnight in front of a dark mirror, the evil angel would appear and pull you down to hell. Sounds like Bloody Mary, don't it? Got to turn around 3 times and say Bloody Mary. And yeah, anyway. They also said that spirits of the dead would rise from their graves on dark nights to gather around the statue at night. People began visiting the cemetery just to see the statue, and it was then that the local fraternity decided to make the statue of grief part of their initiation rites. Okay. Black Aggie sitting where candidates for membership had to spend the night crouched beneath the statue with their backs to the grave of General Angus became popular. One dark night, 2 fraternity members accompanied New Hopeful to the cemetery and watched while he took his place underneath the creepy statue. The clouds had obscured the moon that night, and the whole area surrounding the dark statue was filled with a sense of anger and malice. It felt as if a storm were brewing in that part of the cemetery, and to their charging, the 2 fraternity members noticed that gray shadows seemed to be clustering around the body of the frightened fraternity candidate, crouching in front of the statue. What had been a funny initiation rite suddenly took on an air of danger. One of the fraternity brothers stepped forward in alarm to call out to the initiate. As he did, the statue above the boy stirred ominously. The 2 fraternity brothers froze in shock as the shrouded head turned toward the new candidate. They saw the gleam of glowing red eyes beneath the counseling hood as the statue's arms reached out toward the cowering boy. With shouts of alarm, the fraternity brothers leapt forward to rescue the new initiate, but it was too late. The initiate gave one horrified yell, and then his body disappeared into the embrace of the dark angel. The fraternity brothers skidded to a halt as the statue thoughtfully rested its glowing eyes upon them. With gasps of terror, the boys fled the cemetery before the statue could grab them too. Hearing the screams, a night watchman hurried to the Agnes plot. To his chagrin, he discovered the body of a young man lying at the foot of the statue. The young man had apparently died of fright. The disruption caused by the statue grew so acute that the Angus family finally donated it to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The grieving angel sat for many years in storage there, never again to plague the citizens visiting the Druid Hill Park Cemetery. Okay, does anybody want to go sit in the lap of the dark angel? Just asking. Never heard this story before. Well, I hadn't either until I found it and I read it and I thought it was pretty cool, so I had to put it on here for everybody. I hope my guest makes it pretty soon. Be easier to do this with somebody to bounce stuff off of, but you know how it goes. We do as we do. Burnt church. She was sophisticated, poised, and cultured. In retrospect, this should have made them suspicious. A teacher like her should be presiding over a girls' school in London or New York, not seeking a position in a small town in Georgia. But at the time, they were delighted by her application to ask any questions. They were too delighted, okay, to ask any questions. It will be good for our daughter to learn some culture, the attorney's wife told the pastor's wife. And our boy may find some table manners at last, the pastor's wife responded with a smile. School was called into session in the local church shortly after the arrival of the teacher, and soon the children were bringing glowing reports home. Teacher was special. Teacher taught them manners and diction as well as reading, writing, and arithmetic. All the children loved teacher. The parents were delighted by the progress their children were making at school. Teacher had been a real find. A godsend, said the preacher's wife. But not everyone in town was so satisfied. The local ne'er-do-well called Smith had more sinister stories to tell. That woman ain't natural, he told the blacksmith, waving a bottle of whiskey for emphasis. I seen her out in the woods after dark, dancing around a campfire and chanting in a strange language. Nonsense, the blacksmith retorted, calmly hammering a headed iron bar on his anvil. They say she's got an altar in her room, and it ain't an altar to the Almighty, Smith insisted, leaning forward and blowing his boozy breath into the blacksmith's face. Okay. You're drunk, said the blacksmith, lifting a hot iron so it barred the man from coming any closer. Go home and sleep it off. Smith left the smithy. Smith left the smithy. Okay, Smith left the smithy. But he continued to talk wild about the teacher in the weeks that followed. During those weeks, a change gradually came over the school children. The typical hijinks and pranks that all children played lessened. Their laughter died away, and when they did misbehave, it was on a much more ominous scale than before. Items began to disappear from houses and farms, expensive items like jewelry, farm tools, and money. When children talked back to their parents, there was a hard edge to their voices, and they did not apologize for their rudeness, even when punished. And my daughter lied to me the other day, the attorney's wife said to the pastor's wife in distress. I saw her punch her younger brother and steal an apple from him, and she denied it to my face. She practically called me a liar. The games the children play back in the woods frighten me, the pastor's wife confessed. They chant in a strange language and they move in such a strange manner, almost like a ritual dance. Could it be something they are learning at school? Asked the attorney's wife. Surely not. Teacher is such a sweet, sophisticated lady, said the pastor's wife. But they exchanged uneasy glances. Smith, on the other hand, was sure. That teacher is turning the youngest to the devil. That's what she's doing, he proclaimed up and down the streets of the town. Don't be ridiculous, the preacher told him when they passed in front of the mercantile. I ain't ridiculous. You are blind, Smith told him. That teacher ought to be burned at the stake, like they burned witches in Salem. The pastor, pale with wrath, ordered Smith out of his sight, but the ne'er-do-well's words rang in his mind and would not be pushed away. And the children continued to behave oddly, almost like they were possessed. He would, the preacher decided reluctantly, have to look into it someday soon. That day came sooner than he thought. The very next Monday, his little boy came down with a cold, and his mother kept him home from school. When the pastor returned from his duties for a late lunch, his wife came running up to him, and as soon as he entered the door, she was pale with fright. I heard him chanting something over and over again in his bedroom, she gasped. So I crept to the door to listen. He was saying the Lord's Prayer backwards. The pastor gasped and clutched his Bible to his chest as goosebumps erupted all over his body. This was positively satanic, and there was nowhere the boy could have learned such a thing in this town unless he learned it at school. At that moment, the attorney's wife came bursting in the door behind him. Quick, Pastor, quick, she cried. Smith is running through town with a torch talking about burning down the school. The children are still in class. The pastor raced out of the house with the two women at his heels. They and the other townsfolk who followed them were met by a huge cloud of smoke coming from the direction of the church where the school children had their lessons. The building was already ablaze as frantic parents beat at the flames with wet sacks and threw buckets of water from the pump into the inferno. Smith could be heard cackling unrepentantly from the far side of the building, which was full of the screams of the trapped students and their teacher. The fire blazed with a supernatural kind of force, and the pastor thought he heard the sound of the teacher laughing from within the building when it became apparent that no one could be saved. The church burnt for several hours, and when it was finally extinguished, there was nothing left. Mourning parents tried to find something of their children to bury, and Smith wisely disappeared from town, his mission against the works of Satan completed. The teacher's burnt body was buried deep in the ground and covered with a brick tomb. The children's smaller bodies were interred beneath wooden crosses. Of all the students in the school that fall, only the pastor's small son survived. To this day, voices can be heard in the graveyard of Burnt Church chanting unintelligible words as the school children and their teacher once chanted in the woods outside of town. Sometimes apparitions are seen in dark walkers who roam the graveyard at night, and they say that a brick taken from the grave of the evil teacher can set fire to objects on which they are placed. Anybody ready to go to school yet? Anybody? Any takers? Who wants to go to school? Come on. We can go to the graveyard and take a brick from the grave. How's that? Okay. How you like it so far? Screaming Jenny. Ah, Screaming Jenny. And I don't know what happened right there. The old storage sheds along the tracks were abandoned shortly after the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was built, and it wasn't long before the poor folk of the area moved in. The sheds provided shelter of a sort, although the winter wind still pierced through every crevice, and the small fireplaces that the poor constructed did little to keep the cold at bay. A gentle, kindly woman named Jenny lived alone in one of the smaller sheds. She had fallen on hard times, and with no family to protect her, she was forced to find work where she could and take whatever shelter was available to someone with little money. Jenny had enough to eat in winter. Her never had enough to eat in winter. Her tiny fire barely kept her alive during the cold months. Still, she kept her spirits up and tried to help other folks when they took sick or needed food, sometimes going without herself so that another could eat. One cold evening in late autumn, Jenny sat shivering over her fire, drinking broth out of a wooden bowl, when a spark flew from the fire and lit her skirts on fire. Intent on filling her aching stomach, Jenny did not notice her flaming clothes until the fire had burnt through the heavy wool of her skirt and began to scorch her skin. Leaping up in terror, Jenny threw her broth over the licking flames, but the fluid did nothing to douse the fire. In terror, Jenny fled from the shack and ran along the track, screaming for help as the flames engulfed her body. The station was not far away, and instinctively Jenny made for it, hoping to find someone to aid her. Within moments, her body was a glowing inferno, and Jenny was overwhelmed by pain. Her screams grew more horrible, and her steps slowed. She staggered blindly onto the tracks just west of the station, a ball of fire that barely looked human. In her agony, she did not see the glowing headlight of the train rounding the curve, or hear the screech of the brakes as the engineer spotted her fire-eaten figure and tried to stop. A moment later, her terrible screams broke off as the train mowed her down. Alerted by the whistle, the crew from the station came running as the engineer halted the train and ran back down the tracks toward poor dead Jenny, who was still burning. The men doused the fire and carried her body back to the station. She was given a pauper's funeral and buried in an unmarked grave in the local churchyard. Within a few days, another poverty-stricken family had moved into her shack, and Jenny was forgotten. Forgotten, that is. until a month later when a train rounding the bend west of the station was confronted by a screaming ball of fire. Too late to stop, the engineer plowed over the glowing figure before he could bring the train to a screeching halt. Leaping from the engine, he ran back down the tracks to search for a mangled, burning body, but there was nothing there. Shaken, he brought his train into the station and reported the incident to the station master. After hearing his tale, the station master remembered poor dead Jenny and realized that her ghost had returned to haunt the tracks where she had died. To this day, the phantom of screaming Jenny still appears on the tracks. On the anniversary of the day she died, many an engineer has rounded the curve just west of the station and found himself face to face with the burning ghost of screaming Jenny, as once more she makes her deadly run towards the Harper's Ferry station, seeking in vain for someone to save her. Hey, Roddy. Okay. Where are we here? Let's see. Yeah. Well, my guest may make it before the end. I don't know. We'll see. If so, that's all good. Hello there, Big Bird. Okay, White Lady. The White Lady. Do you guys ever notice there's a whole lot of white ladies in the spirit world? Just saying. Whole lot of white ladies. Tweet, tweet. Yeah, I love my Big Bird. Big Bird is cool. White Lady. Okay, in the early 1800s, the White Lady and her daughter, I wonder if she's the brown lady or the dark lady or the red lady. Anyway, the White Lady and her daughter were supposed to have lived on the land where the Durand Eastman Park, part of Irondequoit and Rochester, now stands. One day, the daughter disappeared. Convinced that the girl had been raped and murdered by a local farmer, the mother searched the marshy lands day after day, trying to discover where her child's body was buried. She took with her 2 German shepherds to aid in her search, but she never found a trace of her daughter. Finally, in her grief, the mother threw herself off a cliff into Lake Ontario and died. Her dogs pined for her, for their mistress, and shortly joined her in the grave. After death, the mother's spirit returned to continue the search for her child. People say that on foggy nights, the White Lady rises from the small Durand Lake which faces Lake Ontario. She is accompanied by her dogs, and together they roam through the Durand Eastman Park, still searching for her missing daughter. The White Lady is not a friendly spirit. She dislikes men and often seeks vengeance against the males visiting the park on her daughter's behalf. There have been reports of the White Lady chasing men into the lake, shaking their cars and making their lives miserable until they leave the park. She has never touched any females accompanying these unfortunate fellows. What's the word there? Dang it, it's on the tip of my tongue. Showing favoritism. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's what it is. Showing favoritism. Or either white or black. That's true, Roddy. That's very true. Yeah, Well, white lady, I think, pertains to like the lady in white. You hear so many stories about the lady in white. There's a lady in white just about everywhere. Um, so I'm assuming that they're meaning she's a lady dressed in white or something. Maybe. Anyway, okay, that was the lovely white lady. This one is called Birth of the Jersey Devil. Everybody loves the Jersey Devil, right? Sounds like the spirit, yeah, goes after men with money in their pockets. Okay, now I gotta ask, Big Bird, what would a ghost of a female gain from taking money from somebody? They can't spend it. So, well, they just con them and take their money and run, or float, or disappear, or whatever it is they do. Anyway, I had to think of Birth of the Jersey Devil. A storm was raging that night in 1735 when Mother Leeds was brought to bed in childbirth. The room was full of women folk gathered to help her, more out of curiosity than goodwill. They had all heard the rumors that Mother Leeds was involved in witchcraft and had sworn she would give birth to a devil. Tension mounted when at last the baby arrived. It was a relief and to some a disappointment when the baby was born completely normal. But a few moments later, before their terrified eyes, the child began to change. The room erupted with screams as the child grew at an enormous rate, becoming taller than a man and changing into a beast which resembled a dragon with a head like a horse, a snake-like body, and bat wings. As soon as it was full grown, the monster began beating all the women, including his mother, with its stick-forked tail. With a harsh cry, it flew through the chimney and vanished into the storm. The monster of Leeds, or the Jersey Devil as he was later called, still haunts the pines of New Jersey, wreaking havoc upon farmers, crops, and livestock, poisoning pools and creeks, and appearing on the New Jersey shore just before shipwreck. Huh, never heard that part before. Casey Jones was the son of a bitch. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting off into another thing here. Casey Jones, that heroic railroad engineer of the Cannonball, was known as the man who always brought the train in on time. He would blow the whistle so it started off soft, but would increase to a wail louder than a banshee before dying off. Got so as people would recognize that whistle and know when Casey was driving past. April 29th, 1900. Casey brought the Cannonball into Memphis dead on time. As he was leaving, he found out one of the other engineers was sick and unable to make his run. So Casey volunteered to help out his friend. He pulled the train out of the station about 11 p.m., an hour and 35 minutes late. Casey was determined to make up the time. As soon as he could, he highballed out of Memphis. Highballing means to go very fast and take a lot of risks to get where you're headed. And started making up for lost time. About 4 a.m., when he had nearly made up all the time on the run, Casey rounded a corner near Bonin, Mississippi, and saw a stalled freight train on the track. He shouted for his firemen to jump. The firemen made it out alive, but Casey Jones died in the wreck. One hand on the brake and one hand on the whistle cord. Now, I don't know where the ghost part of this story was supposed to come in at, but I'm assuming that Casey Jones is supposed to haunt the tracks wherever he collided with the stalled train or what have you, seeing as how excuse me, he was the only one there with one hand on the brake and one hand on the whistle cord. Okay. Wonder what's happened to Paulie. He's always here. Anyway, okay. You guys are watching and listening to Ghostly Stories, brought to you by Half Past Dead Paranormal Radio on YouTube Live. And we're about to get into another story. I was hoping my guest host would make it here soon. He might not make it. Anyway, Death Coach. It is midnight. The streets of Cohoes grow silent as the citizens turn off their lights one by one and go to their well-earned rest. The night is dark and the wind whispers softly, touching the trees and houses, rattling a window pane here and there. In one house, a woman sits beside her window, waiting silently for the doctor to arrive. Her beloved husband lies on the bed next to her. In the light of a single candle, she can see his emaciated face. Emaciated? How do you pronounce that? In other words, he's not looking too good. He is in terrible pain, which even the drugs prescribed by the doctor cannot abate. She clutches his hand tightly, feeling the cold creeping through it. He is barely breathing now. She knows he is slipping away. One part of her is thankful, for she cannot bear to see him in so much pain. Most of her wants to scream out in desperation, begging him not to leave her alone. Outside the house, the soft rumble of wheels and the clip-clop of hooves echo through the still night. The woman tears her eyes from her husband's face and looks out the window, expecting to see the doctor's curricle pulling into the street. Instead, she sees a dark, closed coach with black, gaping holes where the window should be. The shafts of the front of the coach are empty, yet she can hear the sound of invisible horses' hooves as the coach moves slowly down the street. She draws in a breath and exhales softly. It is the death coach. Her husband had told her it would come for him that night, but she hadn't believed him, hadn't wanted to believe him. Yet there it is, rolling softly up the front of the house to stop by the front gate. The sight terrifies her, and she clutches her husband's hand tightly. He opens his eyes and smiles feebly at her, trying to squeeze her hand. "Is it here?" he asks, his voice barely a whisper. She nods. "I love you," he says to his wife. She leans down and kisses him, feels his last breath on her lips. The grip on her hand loosens as she knows he is dead. She straightens up, looking tenderly at his dead face through her tears. A movement by the door causes her to look up. She sees her husband's spirit standing at the door. He gazes first at his dead body and then smiles at her. Then he turns and walks down the stairs. She moves at once to the window, flinging it open and leaning out, hoping to see him again. The front door opens and her husband steps out the front porch and walks slowly to the death coach. The door opens and he pauses for a moment to look towards the window, knowing she is watching. He waves and she waves back, tears streaming down her face. Then her husband steps into the coach and the door closes behind him. Slowly, the death coach rumbles down the street, turns a corner, and is gone. Goodbye, my love, she calls softly as the death coach disappears. Her husband's pain is over, but hers has just begun. With a heavy heart, she closes the window and goes down the stairs to telephone the doctor and tell him her husband is dead. And that, believe it or not, folks, is the last story that I have. My guest didn't make it, and that's okay. Next time, I say. Hit an invisible wall, broke his nose. What? Who hit an invisible wall and broke his nose? Anyway. Yeah, Roddy, I can relate to what you're saying there. I won't even get into that. Okay, anyways, that's all I have for tonight, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And I think maybe my guest was thinking that the show was going to run 2 hours. I'm not sure. But anyway, another time. Bring me on and I'll tell her to look it up. Rhymes with Cody. So it's Rody, not Roddy. Well, just for the record, I will vote for Trump. Not voting at all isn't going to help anything. And I know you ain't going to vote for Hillary, so, just saying. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, all you guys in the chat room, y'all rock. I appreciate everybody being there. Couldn't do a show without you guys. And there was supposed to be some other people. They may not have came in the chat, but hopefully they were there to listen. Friday night, Matt and Pat, Matt Carr of MPI Paranormal. I did a show with him. He was one of the first ones actually I interviewed about 2 years ago when I started doing the Half Past Dead Paranormal Radio show. So it's about time for a return, I think. Anyway, Matt's a really cool guy, and I've got to know a little bit about Pat over the last couple of days. He seems pretty awesome also. And they are up around the Niagara Falls area in New York. And yeah, they're good people. Now, Monday, supposedly, I have to look real quick, so don't nobody go away. But Monday, okay, where's my list? Immortals. Yes. Immortals. You know, like the Highlander dude, there can be only one. No, I don't know about all that. But yeah, Monday on the Paranormal Graveyard we have Immortals, and then the following Wednesday will be another Ghostly Stories episode, and then Matt Carr on Friday, of course, before that. So that is the lineup list for the next 2 or 3 shows. I hope everybody will make it. I have a clipboard by me at all times to keep track of things. Good going, Mary. Ooh, Immortals. What if you met a real immortal? That's a good question. That's a good question. Would it be like the Highlander? Would they be carrying a sword and looking for other immortals because there can be only one? Interesting thought, huh? Anyways, I think my clock froze. It's just sitting there on 7:46. But you guys are awesome. I appreciate it. And all you people out there watching and listening who are not in the chat room, thank you so much. We appreciate it. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this thing because I'm out of material for the night and my guest didn't make it. And I will see all you guys Friday night, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Be there, peoples. Good night, everybody.